He's been at it the best part of 40 years. However tough the hide, if he wants to, he'll sting it. Such as telling President Kennedy's spokesman that his boss was a murderer.
Even to kill his allies, like the Diem family in Vietnam, the right-wing.
He had nothing to do with that.
Oh, come on,
There's no proof of that, whatever.
Look, you were paid to say that at the time.
I'm not paid to say that. We had a liar put that.
You don't have to say that.
We had a liar make statements
Give it a rest.
who was involved in Watergate.
Now 61 and living in Washington, cancer came calling this summer. Christopher, can we start by talking about the cancer? What is the prognosis?
Well, the particular form of malignancy I have is in my esophagus, but it's metastasized, as they love to say, to my lymph nodes. You can practically feel one in my clavicle, on bad days anyway. And I'm afraid to at least a tiny speck in my lungs. And the prognosis for that is that if you lump it all together, and you leave out every other consideration, 5% of us live another 5 years, so that's not ideal. But I have a strong constitution, for example, which has served me quite well, though if I hadn't had such a strong one, I might have led a more healthy life, perhaps.
But in the meantime, in the old cliché, you live day to day.
Oh, yeah, yes, one does. But actually, who doesn't? There is, however, I think something specifically terrifying, which I'm trying to oppose in my writing and my appearances about cancer.
Are you terrified by it?
No, I think it's a superstition, one among many. And I think I know where it comes from, actually, if you'd like me to say. I mean, well, when I was a child, we were all very frightened still by polio. It takes an effort to remember that now, but in many countries people still are. Previous generations would have been smallpox, the heart that never gets the right rhythm, bronchitis, TB, all these things. But none of them have the same, I think, horror as cancers have been allowed to acquire. And I think it's probably because of the idea of there being a live thing inside you, a sort of malignant alien that can't outlive you, but that does, in a sense, have a purpose to its life, which is to kill you and then die. It's like an obscene parody of the idea of being pregnant. In fact, I always feel sorrier for women who have cancer than men. For men, the idea of hosting another life of any kind is sort of hard to think about. But for a woman, it must be a grotesque, nasty version of the idea of being a host to another life. I have a feeling this is why people propitiate it with bogus cures, terrible rumors, scare stories, and so on. And I've set my face to trying to demonstrate that it's a malady like any other, and it will yield to reason and science, and that's what I'm trying to spend my time vindicating.
Reason and science, but
yes.
Yet the word most commonly used about cancer is battling cancer, isn't it?
Yes. And I, again, think that's a version of the pathetic fallacy. It's giving a real existence to something that's, in a sense, inanimate, real sense inanimate. It has a sort of life, but not a real. I rather think it's battling me, I have to say. It's much more what it feels like. I mean, I have to sit passively every few weeks and have a huge dose of kill or cure venom put straight into my veins, and then follow that up with other poisons too. Doesn't feel like fighting at all. Possibly resisting, I suppose, but no. You feel as if you're drowning in passivity and being assaulted by something that has a horrible persistence that's working on you while you're asleep.
Does it make you angry?
No, it makes me sober, objective. I think, well, this is the best known of our disease enemies. I'm one of its many, many, many victims. I'm probably one of the luckier ones in point of being able to have treatment and care. I'd like to prove to other people that it's not the end of everything to be diagnosed with it. In other words, yes, it can be resisted. I think I prefer resistance to battling. I didn't pick this fight, but now I'm in it. I'd like to give it my best shot. And as I say, this means to me is putting myself on the side of those men of medicine and science and reason who are trying to reduce it to something that is understandable, assimilable to reason, and that will be brought under control.
But the likelihood is that it will kill you.
Oh, well, the certainty is that that's what I'll die from. Yeah, some people die with cancer. I might die with it. It will be, unless I have a heart attack, which I could easily have, by the way. I'm much more likely now to have a blood clot than I was before. Or a stroke, perhaps. But I mean, no, it's the proximate cause of my death, and I'm both lucky and unlucky to know it in advance and be able to take its measure.
And there will be people, and they won't say it to your face perhaps, but well, he smoked a lot, he drank a lot.
Yes. Well, that's exactly what's demystifying about it. I mean, there are also people who say it's God's curse on me that I should have it near my throat because that was the organ of blasphemy which I used for so many years. And I thought, well, I've used many other organs to blaspheme as well if it comes to that. No, it is banal in that precise way. It's, if you've led a rather bohemian and rackety life as I have, it's precisely the cancer you'd expect to get. That's a bit of a yawn.
You're not an old man, and you're living with the prospect of an abbreviated life.
Yes.
What does that do to the way you think about life?
Well, it, to borrow slightly from Dr. Johnson, it does concentrate the mind, of course, to realize that your time is even more rationed than you thought it was. And though I can be stoic in point of myself about that, because everyone has to go sometime, and whatever day came that the newspapers came out and I wasn't there to read them, I've always thought that'd be a bad day, at least for me. I now have I have a more pressing idea of what that might be like. Anyway, that's being stoic for my own sake, but for my family it's not very nice, and I could wish perhaps to have led a more healthy and upright life for their sake. And that's a very melancholy reflection, of course. And then there are things I would like to live to see. I've mentioned some of them in an article I wrote on the subject. I'd like to see the World Trade Center reopened. I'd like to see Osama bin Laden on trial, or dead. There are places I'd like to go, people I'd like to meet, books I'd like to at least reread, if not read for the first time. But in a sense, that would always be true. I'd still, I hope, have these ambitions.
Has it given you a mellower view of humanity?
Mellower?
Yes.
Something about that word that I don't relish. I don't know quite why.
Well, that's because you're, a polemicist, a contrarian.
Mellower, no, I mean, no, if you like, no, it's given me my view was already quite stark, which is we're born into a losing struggle. I knew that when I was well, or thought myself to be well. We're born into a losing struggle. We're enjoined by the faithful to consider ourselves to be born sick, and yet commanded to be well. The whole thing is at best ironic. Some think meaningless or random. I don't know if I want to go that far, but it's a stark existence, and for many people born in less fortunate circumstances than mine, it's always stark. It was stark every day till they died. This just makes it starker.
Does it make you regret saying or doing things?
This doesn't, no. I mean, I've sometimes had cause to regret saying things, but, or wish I'd said them in a different way. But that's part of the ongoing revision of being a writer, I hope. This hasn't prompted me to that, no. Perhaps it should.
You're famously a person with very strong convictions and a very persuasive, forceful form of argument. Do you have any?
Thank you.
No, that's what you do. You're celebrated worldwide for it. Do you have any sense of why you were like that?
No, I don't. My parents were both people of principle, it's true. But they didn't expect to inflict this on others. I mean, it was just something they were and something they did. And something they inculcated in me, but they didn't want an audience for it, no. I wanted an audience for it.
Do you regret any of the targets you chose? Like, I mean, who needs to attack Mother Teresa?
It was very important to attack Mother Teresa.
Why?
Well, for the same reason that people admire her, which is you have to care about the millions of people who are stricken by millennial poverty, I mean, poverty of the sort that's almost impossible to escape from. That was her pretended concern. Now, as it happens,
It wasn't her fault.
I'll put it, no, by no means. Well, you say that, but...
It wasn't her fault that people were in poverty.
Not in the first place. But as it happens, I could go on a length about this, but summarized in one statement, which I think is pretty hard to refute. The best known cure for poverty we've come up with is something called the empowerment of women. If you give women control over their cycle of reproduction, you don't keep them chained to an animal cycle of annual pregnancy and so forth, and you give them, if you can add to that by throwing in a handful of seeds or some credit, you'll have done very well. Nowhere where that's tried does it not work. You'll see, in an instant, Mother Teresa spent her entire life campaigning against that. She thought that contraception and abortion were morally equivalent and that abortion was murder. Now, that's not what Calcutta needs, and I think her teachings and preachings were actually counter to the cause that she's supposed to represent. So I thought it was very important to point that out.
Are there any of the targets of your polemic or essay in the past that you regret choosing?
No, I don't. I regret only not doing more about it.
You fell out with a lot of people over your support for the decision to go to war against Saddam Hussein.
Yes.
Do you regret that at all?
Well,
100,000 people dead, maybe more?
To say one had no regrets would be, abnormally unreflective, I think. I mean, no one can be other than horrified at the current state of Iraq. But I don't take the view, the glib view that's taken by so many people, that the casualties are all the result of the intervention. I mean, for one thing, it's an outrage to the idea of moral responsibility. Last month in Iraq, the al-Qaeda forces broke into a Catholic church, as it happens in Baghdad, and massacred about 50 people. People say that's Tony Blair's fault or George Bush's fault. Don't be silly. How dare you absolve the actual murderers of what they've done? Say, well, they wouldn't be there if we weren't there. Are you so sure? Al-Qaeda is operating in innumerable countries and was certainly present in the form of Mr. Sarkawi in Iraq before we got there. I'm not going to have it put like that, no. I also think that there was a terrible misery and implosion coming to Iraq as long as it was left in the control of Saddam Hussein, plus UN sanctions that affected mostly the Iraqi people. I thought that was an impossible state of affairs. And I finally found I couldn't support any policy that involved the continuation of Saddam Hussein in power. The private ownership of Iraq, in other words, by him and his crime family. I thought that you couldn't give your support to any policy that accepted that. So to that extent, I'm not apologetic.
But it did a lot of damage to the United States. And waterboarding, for example, which George Bush only a couple of weeks ago defended as not being torture and as a legitimate means to...
Well, I'm one of the few people you're likely to meet who's been waterboarded, and I read with...
Everyone applauds you for your guts.
I read with alarm and disgust the former president say, what did he say, damn right or damn straight, some awful... I mean, trying to live up, it seemed to me, to the worst interpretation of himself as a Texan big mouth. I don't sacrifice any of my internationalist or humanitarian or democratic principles in saying that these principles are, however, incompatible with the existence of regimes like that of Saddam Hussein, Slobodan Milosevic, Charles Taylor in Liberia, and others who, I think Tony Blair deserves credit for helping to get rid of. Whatever else may be said, that must be part of the account. You didn't ask me, you only said, did I regret the targets I did pick? There are some I regret not picking. I was much too soft on Mugabe. I say it in my memoir. I claim to have had good reasons for it. You know, I was very keen to see the end of white supremacist dictatorship in southern Africa, and I was probably soft-pedaling what I knew about some of ZANU-PF. But having a good motive is not a good enough reason for doing something that was a betrayal, really, of principle. Anyway, hoping to see the end of these and others is a good reason for KBO as...
Keep buggering on.
Well, if the BBC will allow that to be said.
Well, it's a bit early in the evening, but we can try anyway.
Family values.
Yes.